Well, we're picking up where we left off last time in our Wonderful Day in the Lord podcast, looking at the life of Abraham in the early years. We're in chapter 12. Last time we looked at the Abrahamic covenant. God has called Abraham to the land of promise, the land of Canaan. He's going to give this land to him and his descendants, basically his descendants. He's going to bless all the earth through Abraham. And at verse 4, he's 75 years old as he comes to the land, and he takes his wife Sarah, or Sarai at this time, and his nephew Lot with him, and they come into the land of Canaan as God told them to do. And then as he does that, it says in verse 7 that the Lord appeared to Abram, said, "To your descendants I will give this land." So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. Verse 8 is interesting. He says, "Then he proceeded from there to the mountain on the east of Bethel and pitched his tent, and with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east, and there he built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord." So far so good. God has blessed him. God has given him a promise. Abraham seems to be embracing that promise. He does what God tells him to do. He goes into the land, and he is now setting up his tent, which means he's going to stay there for a while. He's built an altar to God so he can worship God. He called upon the name of the Lord here in verse 8. So all looks good. He then travels to the Negev, which is in the southern part of the land here. And as he does that, he is in the southern part of Canaan land, not all that far from Egypt. And so we have our first trial for Abraham showing up in verse 10. There was a famine in the land, so Abraham went down to Egypt. He's already in the southern part of the land God's going to give him. And so he heads right on down to Egypt, and there is a place of safety. So he's in the land God has promised him to give him. He has obeyed God. He's gone there, and then the first trial that shows up, he leaves the land. And we have to read between the lines on that, but this can't be particularly good, and it's not. So as he goes into the land, he is there, and he does a very sad thing here that can't be very good for his marriage. He has his wife Sarai, who is a beautiful woman, claim that she is his sister in order that none of the people of Pharaoh's court might try to kill Abraham for his wife. And so being his sister, that should be okay. And so they actually take Sarai into the harem there of some sort, although apparently never actually making her a concubine or a wife. But she is there. And they treat Abraham, verse 16, very well for her sake. And he is actually given by Pharaoh sheep and oxen, donkeys, servants, camels. He becomes a very rich man by the time we get to verse 2 of chapter 13. Now Abraham was very rich in livestock, silver, and in gold. He becomes a rich man because he's in Egypt in a situation where he shouldn't be. So although we don't know of him doing sinful things, except that he turns his wife over to Pharaoh so that he doesn't get abused himself. That can't have been the best thing for their marriage, of course. And Pharaoh, when he finds out about this, realizes this is a bad thing. Perhaps he was fearful of what Abraham's God might do to him. I don't know. But he gives his wife back, and he tells him in chapter 12, verse 9, "I want you to go. Go away. Leave us alone." So Abraham does that, and he travels back to the land, the southern part, as far as Bethel, and then he once again sets up an altar, or he goes to the altar he had set up before. Abraham now has with him a lot of wealth, especially livestock and so forth. He's back with his wife. Lot, his nephew, is still with him, but Lot also became very wealthy during this time, and so the two families can't seem to stay together. They just have too much of everything. And so they start to separate. They're having conflicts. They separate. Abraham tells Lot, "Go wherever you want to go." And so Abraham, in verse 11 of chapter 13, chooses the valley of the Jordan. And we watch him progressively move further and further, closer and closer to Sodom and Gomorrah, where we'll find tragic things happening starting in the next chapter and on beyond that. Then after that happens, though, when Lot leaves him, God once again says in verse 16, "I'll make your descendants as the dust of the earth." And so there in verse 18, he once again built an altar to the Lord. And so Abraham is now finally, in the place where God told him to be, he is separated from his relatives and his family. He's in the land where God wants him to be. And then we pick up on a very interesting set of stories after that. We'll pick up some of those tomorrow in chapter 14.